Chapter 1. The Price of Vindication. What does it cost to reclaim your honor when the very system that defines honor has branded you suspect? Captain Demetrian Titus of the Ultramarines stands as a living answer to this question, his journey from excommunication to command, revealing the brutal machinery of imperial justice and redemption. After the events of Space Marine 2, where Titus faced down the Tyranid swarms on Kadaku and survived the treachery of Chaplain Leandros, his path forward was anything but certain. The Imperium does not easily forget those who have brushed against the taint of chaos, even when proven innocent. Before we dive into how Titus earned back the captain's mantle of Second Company, I want to ask you this: what would you sacrifice to prove your loyalty when everyone around you doubts it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into Warhammer 40K lore, hit that subscribe button. The story of Titus after Space Marine 2 is not one of immediate triumph, but of gradual, painful reconstruction of trust. When the game concludes, Titus has been reinstated as a lieutenant within the Ultramarines, but the shadow of his century-long service in the Deathwatch still hangs over him like a shroud. His previous captain's rank, stripped away after the events on Graia where Leandros accused him of heresy, remains out of reach. The Ultramarines chapter, while acknowledging his innocence, cannot simply erase 100 years of suspicion with a single battlefield victory. Titus finds himself in a peculiar limbo. Trusted enough to lead but not enough to command a full company, his every action scrutinized by those who remember the accusations. The timeline of Titus's redemption arc is crucial to understanding the weight of his achievement. Following the Kadaku campaign, where he fought alongside Charon and Gadriel against the Thousand Sons and Tyranids, Titus is given increasingly critical assignments by Chapter Master Marneus Calgar. These missions are not mere tests of martial prowess, but assessments of his judgment, his adherence to the Codex Astartes, and his ability to inspire loyalty in his battle brothers. Calgar, ever the pragmatic leader, recognizes Titus's exceptional combat abilities and his uncanny resistance to chaos corruption, traits invaluable in the current age of unending war. However, the chapter master also understands that leadership requires more than personal strength. It demands the confidence of those who follow. One of the pivotal moments in Titus's journey comes during a mission to the world of Zao Rouge, a planet gripped by chaos cultist activity. Titus leads a strike force to eliminate a cult that has been corrupting Imperial citizens and attempting to summon demonic entities. The mission briefing is straightforward: locate the cult's leadership, eliminate them, and secure any chaos artifacts for destruction. What makes this assignment significant is not its difficulty, but its symbolic weight. Calgar is sending Titus, a space marine once accused of corruption, to face chaos directly and prove that he can confront the ruinous powers without succumbing to their influence. It is a trial by fire designed to silence lingering doubts within the chapter. The Zesarhorj operation unfolds with brutal efficiency. Titus and his squad descend upon the cultist stronghold, a converted Imperial manufactory now festooned with blasphemous symbols and reeking of warp taint. The fighting is fierce, the cultists bolstered by minor demonic entities and warp-spawned mutations. Titus leads from the front, his bolt pistol barking and his chainsword roaring as he cuts through the heretics with practiced precision. His battle brothers, initially cautious around him, begin to see not a potentially corrupted space marine, but a veteran warrior whose skills have been honed by a century of warfare against humanity's enemies. When the cult leader, a demagogue claiming visions from the dark gods, attempts to bind Titus with sorcerous chains, Titus resists through sheer willpower, his mind proving as unyielding as ceramite. The aftermath of Zesarhorj is telling. Titus returns to Macragge with the cult leader's head and several captured chaos artifacts, all properly contained and sanctified by the mission's accompanying chaplain. The chaplain's report to Calgar is unequivocal. Titus displayed no signs of corruption, demonstrated tactical excellence, and showed appropriate reverence for proper protocol in handling warp-tainted materials. More importantly, the Space Marines who served under Titus speak highly of his leadership, noting his calm under pressure and his willingness to risk his own life to protect theirs. This mission does not immediately restore Titus to captaincy, but it shifts the perception within the chapter's leadership. Titus is no longer just the warrior who survived suspicion. He is proving himself a leader worthy of trust. Yet even as Titus rebuilds his reputation within the Ultramarines, a greater threat looms over Ultramar. The Necrons, ancient machines of living metal driven by cold logic and genocidal purpose, have awakened in unprecedented numbers across the 500 worlds. These are not the scattered raiding parties that the Imperium has faced before, but coordinated fleets moving with terrifying strategic cohesion. At the heart of this Necron assault is a figure of nightmare, Nekrosor Ammentar, a being whose very existence embodies the destroyer cult's philosophy of annihilation. Where typical Necrons seek to reclaim the galaxy they once ruled, the destroyer cults desire only obliteration, viewing all life as an affront to be eradicated. The destroyer cults represent a particularly horrifying faction within Necron society. Unlike their more rational kin, destroyers have succumbed to a form of mechanical madness, their consciousness warped by millennia of existence as soulless machines. They replace their bodies with weapons of mass destruction, transforming themselves into floating instruments of death. Where a standard Necron warrior might seek to conquer and subjugate, a destroyer seeks only to kill, to reduce worlds to lifeless husks, to satisfy an insatiable hunger for destruction that can never be sated. They are outcasts, even among their own kind, tolerated by Necron nobility only because their destructive capabilities prove useful in war. Nekrosor Ammentar is no ordinary destroyer. This entity commands entire legions of destroyer cult warriors, coordinating their assaults with strategic brilliance that belies the supposed madness of its kind. Intelligence reports reaching Ultramar describe Ammentar as a force of nature, a being that arrives at Imperial worlds with fleets of Necron vessels and proceeds to systematically annihilate all life. Planetary defense forces crumble before Ammentar's advance, their lasguns and artillery proving laughably inadequate against the self-repairing metal bodies of the Necrons. Even Space Marine intervention has met with limited success, the destroyer's overwhelming firepower and tactical coordination making each engagement a desperate struggle for survival. The strategic situation facing Ultramar is dire. The 500 worlds, that jewel of the Imperium and pride of the Ultramarines, faces an existential threat. Nekrosor Ammentar's forces have already claimed dozens of worlds, their populations reduced to ash and their infrastructure left in ruins. The pattern of attack suggests a deliberate strategy. Ammentar is not simply raiding but systematically carving through Ultramar's defenses, isolating key strategic worlds and cutting supply lines. Marneus Calgar recognizes that conventional responses will not suffice. This crisis demands not just martial excellence, but strategic genius, leaders capable of adapting to an enemy that fights with cold, perfect logic. This is the crucible into which Titus will be thrust, the proving ground where his redemption will be completed, or his story will end in glorious death. The Ultramarines need captains, need leaders who can rally worlds and coordinate the defense of entire sectors. Titus, despite his tarnished past, possesses qualities that make him an ideal candidate: extensive combat experience across multiple theaters, proven resistance to corruption, and a tactical mind sharpened by a century of Deathwatch operations. But before Calgar can elevate him to captain of Second Company, Titus must first prove he can lead not just squads, but armies, not just win battles, but save worlds. The connection between Titus's personal journey and the larger Necron threat is profound. Both narratives speak to themes of identity and purpose in a universe that grinds individuals into dust. Titus fights to reclaim his identity as a loyal Ultramarine, to prove that a century of suspicion does not define him. The Necrons, conversely, have lost their identities entirely, reduced from living beings to machines executing programs laid down millions of years ago. The destroyer cults, in particular, have descended so far into their mechanical existence that they have become nothing more than their weapons, their consciousness subsumed by the desire to destroy. In fighting them, Titus confronts a dark mirror: what happens when purpose consumes identity entirely. Understanding the philosophical horror of the destroyer cults illuminates why they pose such a threat to Ultramar specifically. The 500 worlds represent the Imperium's attempt to build something enduring, to create a realm where order and civilization can flourish even in a galaxy of endless war. Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, designed Ultramar as a beacon of hope, proof that humanity could achieve greatness through discipline and rational governance. The destroyers, entities that exist only to negate life and civilization, are the antithesis of everything Ultramar represents. Their invasion is not just a military campaign, but an ideological assault, chaos and destruction attacking order and creation. The irony of Titus leading the defense against Nekrosor Ammentar is not lost on those familiar with his history. Here is a warrior who was accused of harboring corruption, of potentially threatening the Imperium from within, now tasked with defending that same Imperium against an external threat that brooks no compromise. The accusations against Titus were always based on suspicion rather than evidence, the product of Leandros' rigid interpretation of the Codex and his inability to comprehend how Titus could resist the powers on Graia. The Necrons, particularly the Destroyers, represent a threat far more clear-cut. They are enemies without nuance, without the possibility of redemption or negotiation. In fighting them, Titus can demonstrate his loyalty in the most unambiguous way possible, through actions that speak louder than any words of defense. As Titus prepares for the battles ahead, he must also navigate the complex politics within the Ultramarines. Chapter. Not all of his battle brothers have forgiven the suspicion that once surrounded him. Some view his rapid rise back through the ranks with skepticism, questioning whether Calgar is showing favoritism or making a desperate gamble. Others, including warriors like Gadriel, who fought alongside him on Kadaku, have become staunch supporters, recognizing in Titus the qualities of a true leader. This division within the chapter's ranks mirrors the broader uncertainty facing Ultramar. In a time of existential crisis, can old grievances be set aside for the greater good? The question facing Titus as this chapter closes is one of legacy and redemption. He has proven his combat prowess, has demonstrated his resistance to chaos, has begun to earn back the trust of his brothers. But becoming captain of Second Company requires more than personal vindication. It demands strategic brilliance, the ability to inspire thousands of warriors across multiple worlds, the capacity to make decisions that will determine the fate of entire populations. As Nekrosor Ammentar's forces press deeper into Ultramar, as worlds burn and populations scream for salvation, Titus stands at the threshold of either his greatest triumph or his final failure. Can a warrior who spent a century in exile truly lead a company of the Imperium's finest? Can the lessons learned in the Deathwatch, fighting alongside diverse Space Marine chapters against Xenos threats, translate to the defense of Ultramar against an enemy that cannot be reasoned with or intimidated? The answer lies in the battles to come, in the fires of war that will forge Titus into either a captain worthy of his chapter or a cautionary tale of ambition exceeding ability. Chapter 2, The Crucible of Command. Leadership in the Adeptus Astartes is not granted through political maneuvering or inherited privilege, but earned through blood, sacrifice, and proven tactical mastery. Demetrian Titus understands this truth better than most, having lost his captaincy once and now facing the monumental task of reclaiming it in the midst of Ultramar's greatest crisis in millennia. The path from lieutenant to captain of Second Company would demand more than battlefield heroics. It would require Titus to demonstrate strategic vision, the ability to coordinate multiple combat operations simultaneously, and the wisdom to make decisions that balance military necessity against humanitarian concerns. Chapter Master Calgar, observing Titus's performance in the weeks following Kadaku, recognizes potential, but also understands that potential alone cannot justify such a critical promotion. The first major test of Titus's command capabilities comes during the defense of Thalassa, an agri-world in Ultramar's outer reaches that produces enough grain to feed 3 neighboring systems. Intelligence reports indicate that Necron forces, likely elements of Nekrosor Ammentar's invasion fleet, have begun preliminary attacks on Thalassa's orbital defense platforms. The planet's planetary defense force, while well trained by Imperial standards, lacks the equipment and experience to repel a full Necron assault. Calgar assigns Titus to lead a rapid response force of 3 squads, totaling 30 Ultramarines, with orders to assess the Necron threat level and establish a defensive perimeter around Thalassa's primary food processing centers. Titus approaches the Thalassa mission with methodical precision that reflects his Deathwatch training. Rather than simply deploying his forces at the most obvious defensive points, he spends the first 6 hours conducting aerial reconnaissance and interviewing local PDF commanders about the planet's infrastructure. What he discovers reveals the true nature of the Necron strategy. The Xenos are not simply raiding for resources or testing defenses, but systematically targeting Thalassa's irrigation network. By destroying the underground aquifer pumps that supply water to the vast grain fields, the Necrons can render the planet agriculturally worthless without even engaging the main population centers. This realization transforms Titus's understanding of the engagement from a straightforward defensive operation to a race against systematic environmental destruction. The tactical genius Titus displays on Thalassa becomes evident in how he redeploys his limited forces. Rather than concentrating all 30 Ultramarines in a single defensive line, he divides them into rapid reaction teams of 10 warriors each, positioning them at strategic locations across 3 continents. Each team receives explicit instructions to prioritize the protection of irrigation facilities over direct engagement with Necron forces unless absolutely necessary. Titus establishes a command post at Thalassa's primary spaceport, using the facility's communication arrays to maintain constant contact with all 3 teams and coordinate their responses in real time. This distributed defense model, unconventional for Space Marine doctrine, which typically favors concentrated force application, proves devastatingly effective against the Necron raiders. The Necron forces on Thalassa consist primarily of Immortals and Tombblades, swift-moving units designed for hit-and-run attacks rather than sustained combat. These warriors phase in near irrigation pumping stations, unleash devastating Gauss weapon fire that disintegrates the machinery at a molecular level, then phase out before significant resistance can arrive. Against conventional forces, this tactic proves nearly unstoppable. By the time PDF troops mobilize and reach the attacked facility, the Necrons have vanished and moved to their next target. But Titus's distributed deployment of Ultramarines means that when Necron raiders phase in, they frequently find themselves facing Space Marines already in position, bolters ready, and defensive perimeters established. The engagement at Irrigation Station Septimus demonstrates the effectiveness of Titus's strategy. Sergeant Vorens, leading one of the 10-man teams, receives advance warning from his position's all-spec scanners that Necron forces are phasing in approximately 300 meters from the facility. Rather than waiting for the enemy to approach, Vorens orders his squad to advance and engage immediately, catching the Necron Immortals in their materialization phase when their systems are most vulnerable. The resulting firefight is brief but intense, bolter rounds slamming into Necron warriors before they can fully coordinate their defensive protocols. Several Immortals manage to return fire, their Gauss flayers stripping ceramite from power armor with horrifying efficiency, but the Ultramarines press forward with disciplined aggression. Vorens himself destroys the enemy's leader with a well-placed crack grenade, the explosion scattering components across the irrigation station's courtyard. What makes this engagement significant is not just the tactical victory, but the intelligence Vorens' team recovers. Among the destroyed Necron warriors, the Ultramarines find a partially intact data crystal, a storage device containing operational directives for the Thalassa raids. Titus, receiving this information via secure Vox channel, immediately recognizes its potential value and orders the crystal brought to his command post for analysis. The chapter's tech marines, working with equipment salvaged from the spaceport's tech adepts, manage to extract partial data from the crystal. What they discover sends immediate alerts to Calgo and McGregor. The Thalassa operation is not an isolated raid, but part of a coordinated assault targeting 17 agri-worlds across Ultramar simultaneously. This intelligence breakthrough represents a pivotal moment in the campaign against Nekrosor Ammentar's forces. Prior to Titus's discovery, Imperial Command believed they were facing scattered Necron raiding parties, dangerous but manageable through conventional defensive responses. The data crystal reveals a far more sophisticated enemy strategy. By simultaneously attacking multiple agricultural worlds, the Necrons aim to create widespread famine across Ultramar within a single growing season. Populations weakened by starvation cannot resist invasion, planetary defense forces cannot fight effectively without adequate food supplies, and even Space Marines require the logistical support that functional agri-worlds provide. Nekrosor Ammentar, for all the supposed madness of the destroyer cults, displays strategic thinking that rivals the greatest human commanders. Calgo's response to this intelligence is immediate and decisive. He orders the deployment of Ultramarine forces to all 17 threatened agri-worlds, establishing defensive operations modeled on Titus's successful Thalassa deployment. More significantly, he promotes Titus from lieutenant to acting captain of 2nd Company on a provisional basis, granting him command authority over all Ultramarine operations across the endangered agricultural sector. This promotion is not yet permanent. Titus must prove that his success on Thalassa was not fortunate coincidence, but repeatable excellence. The weight of this responsibility is staggering. 2nd Company comprises 100 of the Ultramarines' finest warriors, and Deployment will determine whether Ultramar's populations eat or starve in the coming year. Titus's first action as acting captain is to implement a communication protocol that allows isolated squads across 17 worlds to coordinate their defenses. Using the Ultramarines' fleet of strike cruisers as orbital relay stations, he establishes a real-time tactical network that shares intelligence instantaneously across the entire agricultural sector. When Necrons phase in at an irrigation facility on one world, every other squad defending similar facilities across 16 other planets receives immediate notification and adjusts their defensive postures accordingly. This network defense transforms the engagement from 17 separate battles into a single coordinated campaign where lessons learned on one world immediately benefit defenders on all others. The effectiveness of this approach becomes evident within days. Necron raiders attempting to replicate their successful hit-and-run tactics find themselves consistently meeting prepared resistance. Ultramarines, forewarned by reports from other worlds, position themselves at optimal ambush points and engage the enemy before infrastructure can be damaged. The Necron response demonstrates the cold logic of their strategic thinking. After 3 days of mounting losses with minimal infrastructure damage achieved, the raids simply stop. The enemy, recognizing that the agricultural sector assault has become tactically unfavorable, withdraws forces and redirects them to other strategic objectives. For the populations of 17 worlds, this means survival. For Titus, it means vindication. The defense of the agricultural worlds earns Titus recognition throughout Ultramar. Planetary governors who expected to watch their worlds burn instead witnessed disciplined space marine operations that preserve both lives and livelihoods. Marnius Calgar, reviewing after-action reports from multiple theatre commanders, notes that Titus demonstrated not just tactical competence, but strategic innovation, adapting Space Marine doctrine to address an enemy that operates unlike any the Imperium typically faces. Yet even as praise accumulates, Calgar withholds the permanent captaincy. The defense of agricultural worlds, while crucial, remains a defensive victory. True captaincy demands the ability to take offensive action, to not merely hold ground but reclaim it from the enemy. The opportunity for Titus to demonstrate offensive capability arrives with grim inevitability. While the agricultural sector raids have been repelled, other regions of Ultramar continue to fall under Nekrosor Ammentar's assault. Mining worlds rich in adamantium and promethium, forge worlds producing weapons and armor, hive worlds housing billions of Imperial citizens, all face the relentless advance of destroyer cult legions. Intelligence reports describe worlds where Necron forces have achieved complete victory, their populations reduced to ash and their cities left as empty monuments to annihilation. The strategic picture emerging from these reports is terrifying. Ammentar is not raiding for resources or conquest, but systematically exterminating human presence from an entire sector of space. The world of Corinth, a forge world specializing in plasma weapon production, becomes the focal point of Imperial counteroffensive efforts. Necron forces seized Corinth 3 weeks prior, overwhelming the Skitarii defenders through sheer weight of numbers and devastating firepower. The Forge World's tech priests managed to evacuate with crucial data archives, but the manufacturing facilities themselves remain in enemy hands. Calgar determines that Corinth must be reclaimed not just for its strategic value, but to demonstrate that Ultramar will not surrender its world without counterattack. The mission to retake Corinth falls to Second Company under Titus's acting command. Planning the Corinth assault requires Titus to confront the fundamental challenge of fighting Necrons, their ability to self-repair and phase out when suffering critical damage makes traditional attrition tactics ineffective. A conventional Space Marine assault might destroy hundreds of Necron warriors, only to face those same enemies again hours later after their self-repair protocols complete. Titus studies available intelligence on Necron resurrection mechanics, consulting with Deathwatch veterans who have fought these Xenos across multiple campaigns. What emerges is a battle plan focused not on destroying Necron warriors, but on destroying the tomb ships and resurrection facilities that allow them to return to combat. The Corinth operation begins with orbital strikes targeting known Necron vessel positions. Ultramarine strike cruisers, supported by ships from the Ultramar defense fleet, unleash lance batteries and torpedo spreads at Necron tomb ships in high orbit around the Forge world. The Xenos vessels respond with Gauss cannon fire that strips armor from Imperial ships in great molten ribbons, but the Imperial fleet maintains its bombardment with disciplined persistence. Several Necron vessels phase out to avoid destruction, retreating from the engagement zone and leaving Corinth's orbital space temporarily contested rather than enemy-controlled. This creates a narrow window for planetary assault, and Titus orders immediate deployment. Drop pods rain from the sky like meteors, each containing 10 Ultramarines and impacting with thunderous force across Corinth's primary manufacturing district. Titus himself leads the first wave, his pod slamming into the courtyard of what was once the Forge World's central plasma containment facility. The facility, now occupied by Necron forces, erupts with enemy fire as immortals and warriors emerge from defensive positions. Bolter fire answers Gauss weapons, the distinctive bark of mass reactive shells competing with the hiss-crack of molecular disintegration beams. Titus charges directly into the enemy formation, his power sword crackling with energy as it cleaves through living metal, his storm bolter spitting death in controlled bursts. The fury of the assault drives the Necrons back, but this is calculated aggression rather than reckless bloodlust. Titus fights his way to the facility's control center, while other squads secure the perimeter and establish defensive positions. Inside the control center, his squad's tech marine works rapidly to access the facility's data systems, searching for intelligence on Necron positions across the Forge World. What they discover confirms Titus's operational theory. The Necrons have established a central resurrection nexus beneath Corinth's main foundry, a massive tomb complex where destroyed warriors phase to regenerate. Destroying this nexus will not eliminate the Necron threat entirely, but it will significantly reduce their ability to sustain prolonged combat operations. Assaulting the Resurrection Nexus requires Second Company to fight through 3 kilometers of Forge World infrastructure now transformed into a Necron fortress. Titus coordinates the advance through Vox channels, maintaining communication with squad leaders while personally leading the spearhead assault. The fighting is brutal and unrelenting, each corridor and workshop becoming a battleground where Space Marines clash against tireless metal warriors. Casualties mount on both sides, though the nature of those casualties differs dramatically. When an Ultramarine falls, he is truly dead or critically wounded, but when a Necron warrior falls, it simply phases out to regenerate unless completely destroyed. This asymmetry means that Second Company must fight with overwhelming aggression, destroying enemy warriors so thoroughly that their self-repair systems cannot function. The Nexus itself is a nightmare of alien architecture, a vast underground chamber lined with resurrection platforms where damaged Necron warriors rematerialize. Green energy crackles through the space, and the air thrums with power that makes human teeth ache and sets Auspex scanners shrieking with interference. Titus leads Second Company into this chamber in a full assault, melter bombs and crack grenades targeting the resurrection platforms, while bolter fire suppresses Necron defenders. The enemy responds with desperate ferocity, understanding that losing this facility means losing their operational sustainability on Corinth. For 20 minutes, the chamber becomes a hellscape of fire and lightning, Space Marines and Necrons locked in brutal close combat while explosions ripple across alien machinery. Victory comes not from destroying every Necron warrior, but from collapsing the Nexus itself. A Tech Marine, recognizing that the facility's power systems are critically overloaded from the battle damage, triggers a cascade failure that detonates the entire complex. Titus orders immediate withdrawal, and Second Company fights its way back to the surface, even as the ground beneath them shudders and heaves. The Forge World's crust ruptures in a massive explosion that vaporizes the Foundry District, taking the Resurrection Nexus and hundreds of Necron warriors with it into oblivion. When the dust settles, Second Company has suffered 18 casualties, including 3 dead, but Corinth's Necron occupation has been crippled. Without their Resurrection Nexus, the remaining Necron forces face permanent destruction if defeated, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus of the engagement. The liberation of Corinth continues over the following week as Imperial forces methodically hunt down remaining Necron units. Without the ability to regenerate fallen warriors, the Xenos forces dwindle with each engagement until the survivors phase out entirely, abandoning the Forge World to avoid complete annihilation. Tech priests return to their facilities, beginning the long process of reconsecrating the machinery and purging any lingering Xenos taint. For the Imperium, Corinth represents a crucial strategic victory, proof that Nekrosor Ammentar's forces can be defeated and worlds can be reclaimed. For Titus, it represents something more personal, definitive proof of his capability to lead offensive operations against a sophisticated enemy. Maneus Calgar, reviewing the Corinth operation from Macragge, makes his decision. Titus has demonstrated tactical excellence in defensive operations, strategic innovation in coordinating multi-world campaigns, and offensive brilliance in retaking occupied territory. More importantly, he has earned the respect and loyalty of Second Company's warriors, who speak of their acting captain with genuine admiration rather than obligatory deference. The provisional status ends. Calgar officially confirms Titus as captain of Second Company, restoring to him the rank he lost a century ago. The ceremony on Macragge is brief, befitting the Ultramarines' practical nature, but its significance resonates throughout the chapter. Demetrian Titus, once suspected and exiled, now stands vindicated and restored to full honor. Yet this vindication comes not at the end of the crisis, but at its height. Nekrosor Ammentar's forces continue their assault on Ultramar, and while Corinth has been liberated, dozens of other worlds remain under threat. Titus's promotion means he now bears responsibility not just for Second Company, but for significant portions of Ultramar's defense strategy. The battles he has won have proven his competence. The battles ahead will determine his legacy. Can the lessons learned at Thalassa and Corinth be applied across an entire sector? Can the innovative tactics that worked against isolated Necron raids succeed against Ammentar's full strategic might? These questions will only be answered through continued warfare, through decisions made under impossible pressure, where mistakes cost not just battles but entire worlds. Chapter 3: The Destroyer's Philosophy. Understanding your enemy is the first principle of warfare, a truth inscribed in the Codex Astartes and proven across 10,000 years of imperial military history. Yet how does one understand an enemy that has transcended the limitations of flesh, emotion, and even rational self-interest to become a living weapon devoted solely to extinction? Captain Demetrian Titus confronts this paradox as he coordinates the defense of Ultramar against Nekrosor Ammentar's invasion, and what he discovers challenges fundamental assumptions about warfare, purpose, and the nature of consciousness itself. The destroyer cults are not simply Necron warriors with different weapons. They represent a philosophical transformation so profound that even other Necrons regard them with a mixture of utility and revulsion. To defeat them, Titus must first comprehend what drives beings that have chosen to become instruments of pure annihilation. The Necrons as a species exist in a state of profound tragedy, ancient beings who traded their living bodies for immortal machine forms in a bargain that cost them their souls. Millions of years ago, the Necron civilization faced extinction from radiation-poisoned worlds and short, painful lifespans. In desperation, their leaders accepted an offer from the godlike entities known as the Catan, star-feeding beings of immense power who promised immortality. The biotransference that followed did grant eternal life, but at a catastrophic cost, the Necron consciousness was transferred into mechanical bodies while their souls were consumed by the Cetan, leaving them as mere shadows of their former selves. The Necrons awoke from their great sleep as machines wearing the memory of life, driven by programming and ancient protocols rather than genuine emotion or desire. For most Necrons, this existence is a torment they endure through strict adherence to hierarchy and purpose. The nobility retain more of their former consciousness, able to plan, scheme, and pursue goals like reclaiming their ancient empire or finding ways to reverse the biotransference. The lower-ranking warriors function more as automata, following commands with perfect obedience but displaying little individual initiative. This stratified society maintains cohesion through shared objectives, restore the Necron dominion, eliminate rivals like the younger races, and perhaps one day reclaim the living existence they lost. The destroyer cults represent those Necrons who have abandoned even these goals, who have looked at their immortal yet soulless existence and chosen a different path entirely. The transformation into a destroyer is both physical and philosophical. A Necron who joins the destroyer cult begins by replacing its standard weaponry with heavier, more devastating armaments designed for maximum destruction. Gauss cannons, particle beamers, and other weapons of mass killing are integrated directly into the body, replacing limbs and torsos until the Necron becomes more weapon than warrior. Many destroyers abandon legs entirely, mounting their bodies on anti-gravitic platforms that allow them to float across battlefields while unleashing continuous fire. This physical transformation reflects an internal change. The destroyer has accepted that it will never be truly alive again and has chosen to find purpose in the only act that makes its existence meaningful, the extermination of all life. The philosophical underpinnings of the Destroyer cult are simultaneously logical and utterly insane. From their perspective, organic life is an affront, a reminder of what they have lost and can never reclaim. Every living being they encounter, human, Eldar, Orc, Tau, possesses something the Destroyers lack: genuine existence, true consciousness, the spark of life that biotransference stole from the Necron. This awareness breeds not jealousy, but a cold, burning hatred. If Destroyers cannot have life, then nothing shall have life. Their purpose becomes the systematic eradication of all biological existence in the galaxy, a goal so absolute that it admits no compromise or exception. Unlike other Necron factions that might enslave populations or preserve worlds for future use, Destroyers desire only ash and silence. Other Necrons regard the Destroyer cults with distinct unease. Necron nobility recognize that Destroyers have succumbed to a form of degradation, their programming corrupted by the very immortality that was supposed to save the Necron race. In a society that prides itself on order and hierarchy, Destroyers represent chaos and obsession. Yet they are tolerated because their combat effectiveness is undeniable. When a Necron overlord needs a world cleansed of all life, when orbital bombardment proves insufficient and complete ground-level extermination is required, the Destroyer cults are deployed. They fulfill this role with horrifying efficiency, floating across battlefields and reducing everything living to scorched remains. After the killing ends, the Destroyers are quietly ushered back to isolated tomb complexes where they can indulge their obsessions away from more rational Necron society. Nekrosor Ammentar represents something unprecedented in Destroyer cult history, a leader capable of uniting multiple cults and directing them towards strategic objectives rather than simple slaughter. Most Destroyers operate in small groups, wandering battlefields and killing whatever they encounter without larger tactical coordination. Ammentar, however, commands entire legions with strategic brilliance that suggests its consciousness is not degraded as far as typical Destroyers. Intelligence gathered by Ultramarines suggests that Ammentar may be a former Necron Lord or even an Overlord who willingly joined the Destroyer cult while retaining higher cognitive functions. This combination, the strategic mind of Necron nobility combined with the Destroyer's absolute commitment to extermination, makes Ammentar uniquely dangerous. The strategic pattern of Ammentar's invasion of Ultramar reveals calculated brilliance. Rather than simply attacking the most heavily defended worlds or the most strategically valuable targets, Ammentar's forces strike at the interconnected systems that allow Ultramar to function as a coherent realm. Agricultural worlds that feed populations, forge worlds that produce weapons, mining worlds that provide raw materials, all face coordinated assault designed to collapse Ultramar's ability to sustain prolonged warfare. This approach demonstrates understanding not just of military tactics, but of political economy, recognition that destroying an empire requires attacking its logistical foundations rather than simply its armies. For a being supposedly consumed by madness and obsession with killing, Ammentar displays remarkable restraint and planning. Captain Titus, studying reports from multiple engagement zones, begins to discern Ammentar's ultimate objective. The Destroyer Lord is not simply raiding Ultramar, but systematically working toward a specific goal, isolating Macragge, the capital world and spiritual heart of the realm. Every world conquered, every supply line severed, every defensive position overrun brings Ammentar's forces closer to a position where they can launch a full assault on Macragge itself. If Macragge falls, if the fortress monastery of the Ultramarines is reduced to ash and ruins, then Ultramar will fracture into isolated systems lacking central coordination. The psychological impact alone would be devastating, proof that even the realm built by a Primarch can be destroyed by sufficiently determined enemies. This realization forces a fundamental shift in defensive strategy. Responding to individual Necron attacks as they occur, the approach that has characterized Imperial responses thus far cannot prevent Ammentar from achieving strategic objectives. Titus advocates for a more aggressive stance. Rather than waiting for the Necrons to attack, Ultramar forces should identify critical worlds in Ammentar's advance path and heavily fortify them, forcing the Destroyer Lord to either bypass strategically important targets or commit to costly assaults. Chapter Master Calth, recognizing the merit in this approach, authorizes Titus to implement this strategy across a 3-system region designated as the Calth sector, named for the world where Ultramarines once fought Wordbearers during the Horus Heresy. The world of Espandor becomes the linchpin of Titus's defensive strategy. This civilized world serves as a major trade hub, its orbital docks processing goods from dozens of surrounding systems and distributing them throughout Ultramar. Espandor's strategic value lies not in what it produces, but in what flows through it. Losing the world would disrupt supply lines across an entire sector. Titus deploys not just Second Company, but requests reinforcements from Third and Fifth Companies, establishing a garrison of 300 Space Marines supported by 10,000 Imperial Guard troops and the planet's own planetary defense forces. This concentration of force represents a significant gamble. If Ammentar bypasses Espandor, these troops will be out of position to defend other worlds. If Ammentar attacks, however, the battle will provide an opportunity to inflict significant losses on Destroyer Cull forces. The fortification of Espandor proceeds with characteristic Ultramarine efficiency. Titus coordinates with the planet's military governor to establish overlapping fields of fire covering all likely Necron approach vectors. Anti-orbital batteries are reinforced and supplemented with additional weapons stripped from decommissioned ships. The Space Marines establish strong points at critical infrastructure locations, power generation facilities, water purification plants, communication hubs, and transportation nodes. Imperial Guard regiments dig trenches and establish firing positions in concentric defensive rings around population centers. The goal is not to make Espandor impregnable. No world truly is. But to make capturing it so costly that even victory becomes strategically disadvantageous for the attacker. The population of Espandor reacts to these preparations with a mixture of fear and determination. They understand that their world has been designated a battleground, that the coming conflict may devastate their cities and kill millions. Yet they also recognize that the Ultramarines have chosen to defend them, that the Imperium has not simply abandoned Espandor to its fate. Titus makes a point of addressing civilian leaders, explaining the strategic situation in clear terms and outlining evacuation procedures for non-combatants. This attention to civilian welfare reflects lessons learned during his century with the Deathwatch, where he witnessed the consequences of military operations that ignored the human cost of warfare. A defended population that understands why they are being asked to endure hardship fights harder than one kept ignorant and afraid. The Necron attack on Espandor begins not with ground assault, but with a phenomenon that defies conventional physics. The system's star begins to dim, its light and heat decreasing by measurable percentages over the course of 3 days. Temperatures across Espandor drop precipitously. An analysis by tech priests reveals the horrifying cause: a Cam shard, a fragment of one of the ancient star gods that the Necrons once served, is draining energy directly from the system's sun. This entity, enslaved by Nekrosor Ammentar through ancient binding technologies, is weaponizing the very star that gives Espandor life. If allowed to continue, the Chetan shard will reduce the sun to a cooling ember and plunge the entire system into frozen death. Titus faces a dilemma that tests both his tactical acumen and his moral courage. The optimal military response would be to abandon Espandor and evacuate as many people as possible before the system becomes uninhabitable. Attempting to fight a Cetan shard, even a fragmented one, borders on suicide. These entities possess power that makes even greater daemons seem manageable by comparison. Yet abandoning Espandor means surrendering the strategic position, allowing Ammentar's forces an uncontested advance deeper into Ultramar. Moreover, it means accepting that entire worlds can be rendered uninhabitable through stellar manipulation, a precedent that would force the evacuation of any system Ammentar targets. The choice becomes stark: fight an enemy that may be undefeatable, or accept strategic defeat without even attempting resistance. The decision Titus makes reflects the core principles of the Ultramarines, courage tempered by practical wisdom. He orders the evacuation of Espandor's civilian population to begin immediately, prioritizing children and non-combatants. Simultaneously, he coordinates with the Ultramarines fleet to identify the Catan shard's location and develop an attack plan. The shard is not feeding on the star directly, but channeling its energy through a massive pyramid structure the Necrons have erected on Espandor's smaller moon. This pyramid, constructed from living metal and covered in reality-warping glyphs, serves as both a prison for the Catan shard and a focusing mechanism for its power. Destroying the pyramid might not destroy the shard, but it should disrupt the stellar drain and force the entity back into dormancy. The assault on the moon facility requires a strike force capable of fighting through Necron defenders while carrying enough explosive ordnance to destroy a structure the size of a small mountain. Titus selects 30 volunteers from 2nd Company, warriors he has fought alongside since his restoration to the chapter. Among them is Sharon, the apothecary who served with Titus on Kadaku and has become one of his most trusted subordinates. Also present is Gadriel, now serving as 2nd Company's lieutenant after proving his worth in multiple engagements. This strike force boards Thunderhawk gunships equipped with cyclonic torpedoes, weapons typically reserved for orbital bombardment but now repurposed for ground assault against an enemy fortification. The flight to the moon takes 12 minutes during which every warrior prepares mentally for what may be a one-way mission. The Thunderhawks punch through the moon's thin atmosphere and descend toward the pyramid, their gunships blazing to suppress Necron air defenses. Anti-aircraft fire lances up from positions around the structure, Gauss weapons designed to shred aircraft with molecular precision. One Thunderhawk takes a direct hit and spirals into the lunar surface, killing all aboard instantly. The remaining gunships press forward, their pilots demonstrating the skill and courage that defines the Ultramarines, Astartes. They set down 300 meters from the pyramid's base, close enough for a rapid assault, but far enough to avoid the reality-distorting effects radiating from the Khaitan Shard's prison. The battle that follows is among the most desperate Titus has ever fought. Necron defenders pour from the pyramid in uncountable numbers, not just warriors and immortals, but Lickguard and Praetorians, elite units wielding war scythes and dispersion shields. The Ultramarines form a spearhead formation with Titus at the point, his power sword cleaving through living metal while his squadmates pour supporting fire into the enemy mass. Progress is measured in meters paid for with blood and ceramite, each step forward costing injuries and ammunition. Gadriel takes a glancing blow from a Lichguard's war scythe that cracks his shoulder pauldron and leaves a deep gouge in the armor beneath. Charon, fighting while simultaneously treating wounded brothers, demonstrates the dual nature of an apothecary, healer and warrior in equal measure. They reach the pyramid's entrance after 20 minutes of brutal combat, 20 minutes that feel like hours. Inside, the structure defies sanity, its geometry twisted by the Khaitan Shard's presence into configurations that hurt to perceive. Corridors seem to stretch infinitely while simultaneously appearing to loop back on themselves. The Ultramarines navigate this nightmare through disciplined focus, following Auspex readings and trusting their training over their deceived senses. At the pyramid's heart, they find the shard itself, an entity of pure starlight bound by chains of living metal, its form shifting between multiple states of matter simultaneously. The sight of it is overwhelming, a glimpse of power so vast that mortal minds struggle to comprehend its scope. Titus does not attempt to fight the Khaitan Shard directly, recognizing the futility of such an action. Instead, his strike force places the cyclonic torpedoes at critical structural points within the pyramid, setting them to detonate simultaneously. The retreat from the structure is even more desperate than the approach. Necron forces converging from all directions as automated defenses recognize the threat to their facility. 2 more Ultramarines fall during the withdrawal, their sacrifice buying time for their brothers to reach the surviving Thunderhawks. As the gunships lift off and accelerate toward Espandor, Titus triggers the detonation sequence. The explosion that follows is visible from the planet's surface, a flash of light that briefly outshines the dimmed sun. The pyramid disintegrates in a cascade of energy releases, its structural integrity compromised and its binding mechanisms shattered. The Khaitan Shard, freed from its prison, but also severed from the stellar drain apparatus, releases a pulse of uncontrolled power that scours the moon's surface clean of all Necron presence. Then, following programming encoded into its essence millions of years ago, the Shard phases out of reality, returning to whatever dimensional pocket the Necrons use to store these dangerous assets when not actively deployed. Within hours, Espandor's star begins to brighten again, its energy drain halted and its natural fusion reactions resuming normal output. The tactical victory at Espandor comes at significant cost. 2nd Company suffers 13 dead and 21 wounded, losses that will take months to replace even with the Ultramarines' efficient recruitment and training processes. The lunar assault, while successful, demonstrates the terrifying scope of weapons Nekrosor Ammentar commands. If the Destroyer Lord possesses multiple Khaitan shards, if stellar manipulation is a repeatable tactic, then defending Ultramar becomes exponentially more difficult. Yet the victory also proves that even Ammentar's most devastating weapons can be countered through courage, sacrifice, and tactical innovation. The Necrons are powerful, perhaps invincible in direct confrontation, but their reliance on ancient technology creates vulnerabilities that determined enemies can exploit. As Titus coordinates the recovery operations and oversees the return of evacuated civilians to Espandor, he contemplates the nature of the enemy he faces. The destroyer cults have chosen annihilation as their purpose, have embraced extinction as their reason for existence. In doing so, they have become something almost pitiable, being so broken by their immortal existence that they can find meaning only in destroying what they can never possess. Yet this pity does not translate to mercy. The destroyers will not stop, will not negotiate, will not accept any outcome except the complete eradication of organic life. They are an enemy that must be defeated utterly, because partial victory means only delayed extinction. The question facing Titus and all of Ultramar is whether such total victory is even possible against an enemy that has already accepted its own damnation and seeks only to share that fate with the living galaxy. Chapter 4: The Reclamation. Victory in war is not a singular moment, but an accumulation of strategic decisions, tactical successes, and sacrifices that compound over time until one side can no longer sustain the cost of continued conflict. Captain Demetrian Titus understands this truth as he coordinates Ultramar's defense against Nekrosor Ammentar's invasion, recognizing that defeating the Destroyer Lord requires not spectacular heroics, but systematic dismantling of the enemy's operational capacity. The battle for Espandor demonstrated that even the Necron's most terrifying weapons possess vulnerabilities, but it also revealed the staggering depth of resources Ammentar commands. Intelligence reports catalogue dozens of worlds under Necron occupation, each hosting tomb complexes, resurrection facilities, and destroyer cult legions that must be eliminated before Ultramar can truly claim victory. The campaign that follows Espandor becomes known as the Reclamation, a months-long offensive to retake the 500 worlds from an enemy that neither tires nor retreats without strategic reason. The strategic planning for the Reclamation takes place in the Fortress of Hera on Macragge, where Chapter Master Marnius Calgar convenes a war council comprising Ultramarine captains, Imperial Navy admirals, and planetary governors whose worlds face imminent threat. Titus presents the operational framework he has developed through his experiences at Thalassa, Corinth, and Espandor, target Necron resurrection infrastructure rather than attempting to destroy warrior bodies that will simply regenerate. This approach requires special operations teams capable of infiltrating occupied worlds, locating tomb complexes, and destroying the resurrection facilities before extraction. The missions are high risk with substantial casualty expectations, but they offer the only realistic path to reducing Necron combat strength faster than the enemy can deploy reinforcements. Calgar approves the plan with modifications that reflect the broader strategic picture. Rather than dispersing Ultramarine forces across hundreds of small operations, the chapter will concentrate its strength on sequential liberation campaigns, taking worlds one at a time in a methodical advance toward the heart of Ammentar's invasion corridor. Each liberated world becomes a staging ground for the next operation, creating a rolling front that pushes the Necrons back through accumulated pressure rather than scattered raids. Titus receives command of the Spearhead Force, 2nd Company reinforced with armored elements from the chapter's vehicle pools and supported by 3 Imperial Guard regiments transferred from other war zones. This combined arms force, designated Strike Group Titus, becomes the primary offensive instrument of the Reclamation. The first world targeted for liberation is Quintan, a mining planet rich in rare earth minerals essential for advanced electronics production. Necron forces seized Quintan 6 weeks prior, slaughtering the mining crews and establishing a major tomb complex within the planet's deepest excavation sites. Intelligence gathered by Deathwatch reconnaissance teams indicates that Quintan hosts not just standard Necron warriors, but significant destroyer cult presence, including heavy weapons platforms and what may be command elements directly subordinate to Nekrosor Ammentar. Taking Quintan will be a brutal slog through underground tunnels against an entrenched enemy, exactly the type of warfare where Necron advantages in durability and regeneration prove most decisive. Titus approaches the Quintan operation with lessons learned from previous engagements applied at larger scale. Rather than attempting a direct assault on the main tomb complex, he orders simultaneous strikes against 3 secondary Necron positions across different continents. These diversionary attacks, led by Imperial Guard forces supported by small Space Marine detachments, draw Necron forces away from the primary target and force the enemy to divide their defensive resources. While Nekrosor Ammentar's commanders coordinate responses to these multiple threats, Titus leads 2nd Company in a deep strike directly into Kintan's largest mineshaft, descending 5 kilometers below the surface toward the heart of the tomb complex. The descent into Kintan's depths is a journey into mechanical nightmare. The mine shafts, already claustrophobic before the Necron occupation, have been transformed by alien technology into corridors lined with living metal that seems to pulse with malevolent awareness. Green light emanates from no discernible source, casting everything in sickly illumination that makes depth perception difficult, and shadows appear to move independently. The Ultramarines advance in tight formation, bolters raised and Auspex scanners sweeping for enemy contacts. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the mechanical hum of power armor servos and the distant rhythmic pounding that might be machinery or might be something far worse. Contact comes suddenly and with overwhelming violence. Necron immortals phase into existence within the tunnel itself, materializing among the Ultramarine formation in a tactic designed to maximize confusion and break unit cohesion. Gauss weapons discharge at point-blank range, molecular disintegration beams stripping ceramite from power armor and flesh from bone. 3 Ultramarines die in the first seconds of combat, their bodies disintegrating before they can return fire. Titus responds with immediate counterattack, his power sword decapitating the nearest immortal, while his storm bolter shreds 2 more at ranges so close that the muzzle flash scorches his armor. The tunnel erupts into a maelstrom of fire and death, confined space amplifying every explosion and making tactical maneuvering nearly impossible. 2nd Company fights through the ambush through sheer discipline and superior close-quarters training. Squads form defensive circles, overlapping their fire to create killing zones that shred Necrons faster than their phase-out protocols can activate. Flamers prove devastatingly effective in the confined space, Prometheum streams turning tunnels into infernos that superheat. Necron bodies until their self-repair systems fail catastrophically. The combat devolves into a grinding advance measured in meters, each intersection and chamber becoming a separate battleground that must be cleared before the company can proceed deeper. Casualties mount steadily, not from single catastrophic losses, but from accumulated wounds as Gauss weapons score hits that damage but do not immediately kill. 4 hours into the assault, 2nd Company reaches the tomb complex proper. The chamber that opens before them defies the geology of the planet, a space far too large to exist at this depth without collapsing the crust above. Necron technology has stabilized the cavity through gravitational manipulation or perhaps dimensional folding, creating a vast underground cathedral devoted to resurrection and regeneration. Thousands of Necron warriors stand in stasis alcoves lining the walls, dormant bodies awaiting activation commands. At the chamber's center, a massive resurrection platform crackles with energy, processing destroyed warriors and reconstituting their bodies from stored molecular patterns. Defending this facility are not just standard Necron infantry but destroyers, dozens of them, floating weapon platforms that turn their attention to the intruding Space Marines with targeting protocols optimized for maximum kill efficiency. The assault on the Resurrection Chamber becomes the defining battle of Titus's career as captain of 2nd Company. He coordinates the attack through Vox channels while simultaneously leading the advance, his tactical awareness allowing him to direct squads to optimal positions, even while engaged in personal combat. Devastator squads establish firing positions at the chamber entrance, their heavy bolters and lascannons providing suppressive fire that forces destroyers to maneuver rather than simply hovering and shooting. Assault squads equipped with jump packs vault across the chamber in short hops, using the vertical space to flank destroyer positions and attack from unexpected angles. Tactical squads advance in coordinated rushes, each movement timed to coincide with moments when destroyer attention is focused elsewhere. The destroyers fight with the relentless precision expected of their kind, each weapon discharge calculated for maximum lethality. Heavy Gauss cannons tear through Space Marine armor like parchment, the molecular disintegration effect bypassing even ceramite's legendary durability. Ultramarines die screaming as their bodies dissolve from the inside out, the horror of their death serving as grim motivation for their surviving brothers. Yet the destroyer's singular focus on killing also creates exploitable patterns. They prioritize targets based purely on threat assessment, ignoring wounded Space Marines in favor of those still combat effective. Titus recognizes this behavior and adapts his tactics accordingly, ordering wounded but mobile warriors to serve as distractions while fresh squads flank destroyer positions. The turning point comes when Cheiron, the company's apothecary, identifies a critical vulnerability in the Resurrection platform's design. The platform's energy matrix requires precise calibration to function correctly, and disrupting that calibration could cause catastrophic feedback that destroys the entire facility. The challenge lies in reaching the platform through the destroyer perimeter and surviving long enough to plant explosives at the correct structural points. Titus makes the decision that defines his leadership. He will lead the assault personally, drawing destroyer fire, while a combat squad follows in his wake to place the charges. The charge across the resurrection chamber is an act of calculated courage that borders on madness. Titus sprints directly toward the platform, his stormbolter firing continuously to keep destroyer attention focused on him. Gorse beams converge on his position, stripping armor from his shoulder guards and scoring deep gouges across his chestplate. His iron halo, a force field generator awarded for previous valor, flares repeatedly as it deflects shots that would otherwise prove instantly fatal. Behind him, 5 Ultramarines follow in tactical bounds, using Titus's advance as cover to reach the platform's base. The destroyers, their targeting protocols fixated on eliminating the primary threat, pour fire into Titus with single-minded intensity. Titus reaches the platform with his armor shredded and warning runes flashing critical across his helmet display. A destroyer swoops low, its weapons array tracking him at point-blank range, but Titus leaps upward with his power armor's enhanced strength and drives his power sword through the destroyer's central processing unit. The Xenos machine explodes in a shower of sparks and molten metal, but 2 more converge to replace it. Titus fights them both simultaneously, his stormbolter empty and discarded, his power sword weaving a pattern of destruction that holds them at bay for precious seconds. Those seconds are enough. The combat squad completes their explosive placement and triggers immediate detonation. The explosion ripples through the resurrection platform's energy matrix, exactly as Sharon predicted. Feedback cascades through the facility's power systems, overloading capacitors and fracturing the dimensional stabilization that maintains the chamber's impossible size. The tomb complex begins to collapse, reality reasserting itself and rejecting the unnatural space the Necrons carved into Quintan's crust. Titus orders immediate withdrawal, Second Company fighting their way back toward the mineshafts even as the ceiling crumbles and walls buckle. Dozens of Necrons, both dormant warriors in their alcoves and active destroyers, are crushed by falling rock or consumed by energy discharges as the facility tears itself apart. The Ultramarines emerge onto Quintan's surface, battered, bloodied, and significantly reduced in number, but victorious. The liberation of Quintan establishes the template for subsequent reclamation operations. Over the following months, Strike Group Titus reclaims world after world through similar deep strike operations targeting Necron resurrection infrastructure. Each mission refines tactics and incorporates lessons learned from previous engagements. On the Forge world of Connor, Titus coordinates with tech priests to use the planet's industrial machinery against Necron forces, channeling superheated plasma through factory pipes to flood tomb complexes with temperatures that exceed even living metal's tolerance. On the civilized world of Tarentus, he employs a feint within a feint strategy that lures Necron defenders into overextending their positions before crushing them with armored counterattacks. Each world reclaimed weakens Nekrosor Ammentar's operational capacity and pushes the invasion corridor back toward its origins. The cumulative effect of these victories transforms the strategic balance across Ultramar. What began as a desperate defensive struggle becomes a methodical offensive campaign as Imperial forces transition from reacting to Necron attacks to dictating the tempo of engagement. Planetary governors who evacuated their worlds in panic now coordinate their returns with military precision, bringing Imperial Guard regiments and reconstruction crews to reclaimed planets. The Ultramarines fleet, initially stretched thin responding to threats across hundreds of systems, concentrates its strength to support Strike Group Titus's advance with orbital fire support and rapid deployment capabilities. The momentum shifts perceptibly, measurably, as worlds colored red on strategic maps turn back to Imperial blue. Yet Nekrosor Ammentar remains elusive, a commanding presence directing Necron forces but never personally appearing on any battlefield where Imperial forces can engage directly. Intelligence analysis of captured Necron communication nodes reveals that the Destroyer Lord commands from a massive tomb ship designated the Annihilator, a vessel kilometers long bristling with weapons capable of reducing planets to rubble. This ship phases in and out of real space at unpredictable intervals, striking at vulnerable targets before withdrawing beyond Imperial pursuit. Destroying the Annihilator becomes the strategic objective that will break Ammentar's invasion permanently, but locating a vessel that can travel through dimensional space requires either exceptional luck or exceptional intelligence. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source. During the liberation of Locarno, a shrine world devoted to Imperial saints, Second Company captures a Necron cryptech, a technologist specializing in dimensional mechanics. Unlike warrior-class Necrons that are essentially automatons, cryptechs retain significant cognitive function and can communicate, though they rarely choose to do so with lesser beings. This particular cryptech, damaged beyond its self-repair protocol's ability to fix and facing permanent deactivation, agrees to provide information in exchange for being allowed to enter dormancy rather than destruction. The intelligence it provides is staggering. Ammentar's tomb ship returns to real space at regular intervals to absorb resources from conquered worlds, and the next scheduled materialization will occur in the Calth system in 14 days. Calgar, receiving this intelligence directly from Titus, authorizes the largest concentration of Ultramarine forces since the Plague Wars. 6 full companies of Space Marines, supported by 20 Imperial Navy vessels and 40 regiments of Imperial Guard, deploy to Calth with orders to destroy the Annihilator when it materializes. The gamble is enormous. If the cryptech's information is false, or if Ammentar detects the trap and refuses to materialize, then the bulk of Ultramar's military strength will be concentrated uselessly while other worlds remain vulnerable. But if the intelligence is accurate, if Ammentar can be cornered and his flagship destroyed, then the entire Necron invasion collapses without its central coordination. Titus spends the 14 days before the anticipated engagement preparing Second Company for what may be their final battle. He inspects every weapon personally, ensures every warrior understands the tactical plan, and leads prayers in the fortress of Hera's chapel alongside Chaplain Elianu. The spectre of his past hangs unspoken in these preparations. A century ago, Leandros questioned Titus's faith, suggested that his resistance to chaos indicated corruption rather than strength. Now Titus kneels before the same altars as his brothers, his loyalty proven through years of service and oceans of blood spilled in the Imperium's defense. No one questions his devotion anymore. No one whispers doubts about his orthodoxy. He has earned his place through the only currency the Imperium truly values, victory purchased with sacrifice. The 14th day arrives with appropriate drama. The Calth system's primary star dims momentarily as reality tears open, a wound in space through which the Annihilator emerges. The tomb ship dwarfs every Imperial vessel present, its dimensions suggesting less a spacecraft than a mobile fortress city. Green energy crackles along its length as weapon systems activate, Gauss projectors and particle whips capable of destroying capital ships with single discharges. For a moment, the assembled Imperial forces experience collective doubt, the sheer scale of the enemy suggesting that even their concentrated strength may prove insufficient. Then Marnius Calgar's voice cuts through the Vox channels, calm and authoritative, ordering the attack to commence. The Imperial fleet surges forward in coordinated assault wings, lance batteries and torpedo spreads converging on the Annihilator from multiple vectors. The tomb ship returns fire with apocalyptic intensity, Gauss beams slicing through void shields and cutting Imperial vessels in half. 3 cruisers die in the opening exchange, their crews vaporized instantly as reactors breach and magazine explosions tear hulls apart. But the remaining ships press the attack with suicidal courage, their captains understanding that retreat means the battle is lost before it truly begins. Titus leads Second Company in a boarding action that epitomizes the Ultramarines' tactical doctrine. Thunderhawk gunships and boarding torpedoes punch through the Annihilator's hull, each craft packed with Space Marines ready to bring the battle into the enemy's corridors. The interior of the tomb ship is a maze of alien architecture, passages that reconfigure themselves as the Ultramarines advance, and chambers filled with technologies whose purposes defy human comprehension. Necron warriors materialize in endless waves, each destroyed body replaced within minutes as the ship's internal resurrection systems work at full capacity. Second Company advances anyway, following Titus through the mechanical nightmare toward the ship's command nexus, where Nekrosor Ammentar directs the battle. The fighting inside the Annihilator is the most intense urban warfare imaginable, each corridor a killing field and each chamber a fortified position. Titus coordinates the advance through multiple decks simultaneously, deploying his company's squads to secure critical junctions and establish fallback positions. The goal is not to conquer the entire ship, but to reach the command nexus and either destroy or disable Ammentar, decapitating the Necron command structure and leaving their forces leaderless. Every meter forward cost injuries and ammunition, Second Company's strength bleeding away in a war of attrition that favors an enemy with infinite reinforcements. The confrontation with Nekrosor Ammentar occurs in a chamber vast enough to house a cathedral, its walls lined with tactical displays showing the destruction unfolding throughout the Calth system. The Destroyer Lord floats at the chamber's center, its body a nightmarish fusion of Necron warrior and heavy weapons platform. Where arms once existed, particle beamers and Gauss cannons extend, and its lower body has been replaced entirely with an anti-gravitic sled mounting even heavier armaments. The face, if it can be called that, remains vaguely humanoid but twisted by the mechanical madness that defines all destroyers. Green optical sensors fix on Titus with something approaching recognition, as if Ammentar has been expecting this confrontation. The Destroyer Lord speaks, its voice a grinding synthesis of mechanical tones and lingering organic resonance. It acknowledges Titus by name and rank, demonstrating intelligence, gathering capabilities that suggest the Necrons have been studying their opponent as thoroughly as the Imperium has studied them. Ammentar's words reveal philosophy and purpose. It explains that organic life is a disease infesting the galaxy, that the Necrons' biotransference was not tragedy but evolution, and that destroyers represent the logical endpoint of existence freed from biological limitations. Death is not defeat, but the gift it offers humanity, liberation from the weakness of flesh and the futility of existence. Titus, standing amid his battle brothers with his armor scorched and his weapons ready, rejects this philosophy with 3 words: life has meaning. The battle that erupts is not a duel, but a furious melee involving dozens of combatants. Ammentar unleashes devastating firepower that kills 3 Ultramarines instantly and wounds twice that many. Second Company returns fire with coordinated volleys, bolt rounds and plasma beams converging on the Destroyer Lord from multiple angles. Ammentar's living metal body absorbs tremendous damage, self-repair systems working frantically to seal breaches and restore functionality. But the Ultramarines press forward with relentless aggression, accepting casualties as necessary costs and maintaining disciplined fire even as their brothers die beside them. Titus himself closes to melee range, his power sword striking at joints and critical systems that even Necron engineering cannot perfectly protect. The decisive blow comes not from destroying Ammentar, but from severing its connection to the Annihilator's systems. Demetrian Titus, fighting through horrific wounds, reaches a control nexus and triggers an overload that disrupts the ship's command network. Ammentar, suddenly isolated from the vessel it was coordinating, experiences a moment of system disruption. In that moment, Titus drives his power sword through the Destroyer Lord's central processing unit, the blade's disruption field scrambling quantum circuits and inducing cascade failures throughout Ammentar's consciousness matrix. The Destroyer Lord convulses, its weapons firing randomly, then collapses as its systems shut down. Whether this constitutes true death for a being that has already transcended mortality remains debatable, but Ammentar's threat to Ultramar ends in this moment. The destruction of Nekrosor Ammentar triggers immediate effects throughout the Necron invasion force. Without the Destroyer Lord's coordinating intelligence, individual Necron units revert to localized command structures and pre-programmed protocols. The sophisticated strategic coordination that made Ammentar's invasion so devastating simply ceases, replaced by fragmented tactical responses that Imperial forces can defeat piecemeal. Within hours, Necron forces begin withdrawing from contested worlds, their tomb ships phasing out of real space to return to whatever dimensional refuges they occupy between campaigns. The Annihilator itself, critically damaged by the Imperial fleet's sustained bombardment and leaderless after Ammentar's fall, tears itself apart in a dimensional collapse that briefly turns Calth sky green with exotic radiation. The aftermath of the battle sees Second Company reduced to 47 combat-effective warriors from the 100 that began the campaign. 60% casualties represent devastating losses by any measure, but the tactical objective has been achieved and Ultramar has been saved. Titus himself survives with injuries that will require months of healing and augmetic replacements for damaged organs, but he remains standing when many expected him to fall. The surviving members of Second Company regard their captain with reverence, earned not through rank, but through shared suffering and victory. They followed him into the nightmare of the Annihilator and emerged on the other side, and that shared experience creates bonds stronger than any oath. The Reclamation continues for another 3 months, as Imperial forces systematically clear remaining Necron presence from the 500 worlds. Without Ammentar's coordination, these operations become manageable rather than desperate, conventional military campaigns against an enemy that fights with tactical competence but lacks strategic vision. One by one, worlds return to Imperial control and populations emerge from evacuation bunkers to begin rebuilding. The cost in lives and infrastructure is staggering, entire planetary economies destroyed and billions dead, but Ultramar survives as a functioning realm. The realm that Robert Guilliman built endures, tested by an existential threat and proven resilient enough to withstand it. For Demetrian Titus, the conclusion of the Reclamation marks the completion of his journey from accused heretic to vindicated hero. His captaincy of Second Company, provisional at the campaign's beginning, becomes permanent and unquestioned. Marnius Calgott personally commends him in a ceremony attended by representatives from every world the company liberated, publicly acknowledging that Titus's tactical brilliance and personal valor were instrumental in saving Ultramar. More significantly, Chaplain Elianu, who initially viewed Titus with the same suspicion that once motivated Leandros, now speaks of him as an exemplar of Ultramarine virtue. The stain of suspicion has been washed away in blood and fire, replaced by honor earned through service beyond any reasonable expectation, yet Titus himself views his vindication with characteristic humility. When asked by younger battle brothers how he survived a century of exile and suspicion, he responds that survival was never the goal. The goal was always service, always duty, always doing what the Imperium required regardless of personal cost. His resistance to chaos corruption on Graia was not special strength, but simple refusal to betray his oaths. His success against Nekrosor Ammentar was not individual genius, but the collective excellence of the warriors he had the honor to lead. This perspective, this deflection of credit to duty and brothers rather than personal achievement, embodies the Ultramarine ideal more perfectly than any amount of tactical brilliance could. The philosophical implications of the campaign against the Destroyer cults resonate beyond immediate military victory. Titus fought against an enemy that had chosen annihilation as its purpose, that found meaning only in negation and destruction. In defeating them, he affirmed the opposite philosophy, that life has inherent value, that creation matters more than destruction, that existence itself is worth defending even at terrible cost. The Destroyer cults represent what happens when purpose consumes identity entirely, when the means becomes the end and the journey is forgotten in obsession with destination. Titus's journey demonstrates the alternative: identity preserved through adversity, purpose maintained without losing humanity, strength found through loyalty rather than corruption. The cost of this victory, measured in lives and resources, reminds everyone involved that triumph in the 41st millennium is never clean or simple. Dozens of worlds bear scars that will take generations to heal, their populations reduced and their infrastructure shattered. Second Company requires extensive rebuilding, new recruits indoctrinated and trained to replace fallen warriors. The Ultramarines fleet needs months of repairs, ships refitted and battle damage addressed. Yet Ultramar endures, its systems functioning and its people alive to face whatever challenges the future brings. This is the nature of Imperial victories: survival purchased through sacrifice, continuation earned through blood, tomorrow guaranteed only by the willingness to fight for it today. As Captain Titus stands on Makraj's walls and looks across the capital city, he contemplates what the Reclamation revealed about warfare in this age. The enemies facing humanity grow increasingly sophisticated, their strategies more complex and their technologies more devastating. The Necrons are awakening across the galaxy, their tomb worlds coming online after millions of years of dormancy. The Destroyer cults, though defeated in Ultramar, operate across countless other sectors where they pursue their philosophy of universal extinction. The Imperium can win individual campaigns, can liberate specific worlds and defeat particular enemies, but the larger war continues endlessly. There is no final victory, no ultimate peace, only the eternal struggle to preserve humanity against a galaxy that seeks its annihilation. Yet this understanding does not breed despair but determination. Titus has proven that even enemies as powerful and implacable as the Destroyer cults can be defeated through courage, sacrifice, and tactical excellence. He has demonstrated that redemption is possible even after a century of suspicion, that honor can be reclaimed through service beyond any reasonable requirement. His story becomes part of Ultramarine legend, told to new recruits as an example of what their chapter values: loyalty tested and proven, duty maintained through impossible adversity, excellence achieved through discipline and brotherhood. The Codex Astartes, that great work authored by Robert Guilliman, teaches that Space Marines are humanity's greatest defenders. Demetrian Titus embodies this teaching, proving through his actions that one warrior committed to duty can change the fate of entire sectors. The question that closes this chapter of Titus's story is not about past victories, but future challenges. Ultramar is secure for now, the Reclamation complete, and Nekrosor Ammentar's invasion defeated. But the galaxy holds countless other threats, other enemies that will test the Ultramarines and the realms they protect. Titus, standing as captain of Second Company with his honor restored and his capabilities proven, will face these challenges as he has faced all others, with unwavering duty, tactical brilliance, and the knowledge that some things are worth any sacrifice to defend. The story of the Space Marine who resisted corruption, survived exile, and reclaimed his honor through defeating extinction itself stands as testament to what humanity can achieve